Then you wrote for the New Statesman earlier in the week about whether Rishi Sunak could lose his seat. And if he were to do so, I think he would be the first sitting Prime Minister to have ever been in that unfortunate position. What can you tell us about his movements in this campaign and what that might say about how worried or not he is, both for his own seat and for the party?
So regular subscribers to the Morning Call newsletter, please do subscribe, by the way. I do a chart most days for it. We'll find that one of the charts is where on earth is the Prime Minister going? In what seats is he campaigning? And by the way, this is very much, I don't want to say guesswork, but you are just going based off what you can hear, because you don't get an itinerary of which constituencies the Prime Minister is visiting unless it's going to be a big spotlight media event. So, if he's door knocking in a small village in Cheshire, you only really know about that if you have a friend of a friend of a friend, or it appears on Facebook, as it did in the case of when I noticed that the Prime Minister has been in Chester South and Edinburgh last weekend. He is going all over. There is no correlation. He's not staying in marginals, the super marginals, the so-called red wall, those battlegrounds that Boris Johnson won. He's not staying there. He's going to safe shire seats in the north, in the south, in Devon, in Cornwall, in parts of Yorkshire, and indeed in Cheshire. The main battleground in Cheshire is mid-Cheshire, these salt towns of Winsford and Northwich and Middlewich, and the Prime Minister hasn't visited there. He's instead visited a safe Tory shire seat called Chester South and Edinburgh. He was campaigning in a village there, which really, if you ever doubt the polls, if you're you look at the numbers and you think, surely not, as even I do, I think the visits of the Prime Minister to safe shire seats is evidence enough that the polls are bearing out some semblance of reality. And it really is all hands on deck here. I know Conservative activists in Yorkshire who have been told, as part of their tour in marginal seats, abandon York Outer, a traditional Tory Labour marginal, and go to South Cheshire, which, has never had a Labour MP in ever its history. It really is. What did we say at the start of this campaign? I wrote about the Tories being an error margin from oblivion. Well, yeah, the polls are right. It looks like they are, based on the visits.
And what are the chances of Rishi Sunak losing his own seat of Richmond?
Richmondshire and Northallerton. It's rural North Yorkshire. It's not far from where I grew up. It's not far from where I got this wonderful accent. And so it has no Labour history whatsoever. Traditionally, the idea of a Labour candidate winning there is for the birds. Not even during Tony Blair's New Labour years, when they were surging across the country, did a Labour candidate get elected as a councillor in any corner of Richmond, Catterick, Northallerton or elsewhere. Okay, so honestly, the opposition in Richmondshire has often been the Liberal Party, not the Liberal Democrats, the Liberal Party. They're still alive in some parts of the country, and a smattering of independents. But if you look at, the national polls and you transpose it onto the country as the Britain Predicts model does, my goodness me, yes, it does look quite close based on the current numbers. To be honest with you, according to Britain Predicts, Sunak is a margin of error and a bit from defeat. We have a Survation poll which shows, I wouldn't say a margin of error and a bit, but it's a bit safer for Sunak. I think it's because you're prompting for the candidate. And to be honest, while Brand Sunak is pretty much dead, around about a fifth to a quarter of us still have a favourable view of him, and maybe that might mean something is in his own seat. But I think back to 1997, Enfield Southgate, Michael Portillo. There was a poll a week before the election day in 97, which had Portillo 3 points ahead. His team, his activists thought, surely not, because we're home and dry in this bit of London anyway. It's very middle class. It's very well to do for us. We need not worry. Portillo, instead of winning by 3 points, he ended up 3 points behind. He lost by 3 points. So a 6 point difference there. Now, if there was a 6 point difference, in the poll in Richmondshire, Sunak would still hold on. But, it's not guaranteed. It's still error margin stuff, really. So I would say, the odds favour Sunak, but honestly, don't write it off anymore. Don't write anything off on election night on the 4th of July.
From one party leader to a former one, do many people still hold affection for Jeremy Corbyn?
Do many people hold affection for Corbyn nationally? No, not particularly. But in his Islington seat, what were the numbers? It was like 50-something%, still quite have a favourable view towards him. And it compares to around about 35% who feel the same way for Keir Starmer. And this is just in the Islington seat, by the way. So there was a poll commissioned by Novara Media and Stats for Lefties, who thought, yes, let's find out what the feeling on the ground is like. And I wrote a piece, was it a month ago? I wrote it as well last year as well, when Corbyn was thinking of standing. And I said, look, popular, relatively popular, however popular Corbyn actually is popular candidates departing their former party and standing as independents, they normally tend to rack up around about half on average of what they got before. So if you got 66% before, you should end up with 33%. But there's really fat tails there. So it could be as low as 14%, high as 45%. Okay. Now we have a poll by Survation again. Full kudos to them, by the way, for doing these constituency surveys. They really ground those models you see, and they help mine, definitely, particularly when it comes to the Greens. They have Corbyn 14 points behind.
Yeah, I got it in front of me. They've got Corbyn on 29%, Labour 43%, and the others all on 6 or 7. Yeah. But then they've got this thing called a forced choice. Can you tell us what that means? Because Corbyn actually wins that one. When
you've got a wavering voter, an undecided voter, you tend to be like, well, if you want to try and convince them over to you force choice them. You say, if there's a choice between Labour and the Tories, who would you pick? And if it's choice between change and more of the same, who would you pick? And that's the language Labour uses, the Lib Dems uses, and other parties use. And this poll uses it as well. If you've got a choice between the Labour candidate and Jeremy Corbyn, who would you pick? And when you exclude the undecideds, because by the way, there is about a fifth of undecided voters. Fifth of the voters in Islington are undecided. Exclude them, you end up with Corbyn 55, Labour 45. Now, of course, that's not a done deal, but that puts Corbyn ahead. And I would say, last week of the campaign, if you run on squeeze, if you run on personality alone, Corbyn might just edge the Labour candidate.
Is that just an embarrassment for Labour? Will they be really sore about that? How would that go down, do you think?
Depends how the Greens do. It's interesting how nervous Labour is about Thangam Debonair winning over in Bristol. I think they're sending quite a few shadow cabinet members there. I think Keir Starmer himself has been there. She's, of course, Labour's shadow cultural secretary. So she's quite a big dog in the party. She's very senior. And they're concerned. They genuinely are concerned that the Greens might take it from them. So I think if you see that, maybe you see the Greens do quite well elsewhere, maybe Brighton, maybe they pick up a few seats, and Corbyn gets his seat, then you've got a narrative building there, haven't you? You've got a narrative that Keir Starmer's lost the left, that there's this sort of urban youth vote that he has deprioritised in the past 4 years in search of the swing voters that voted for the Tories in 2019. That I can see that narrative building on election night quite quickly.
I just wondered if you put Faiza Shaheen in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more unlikely that she will win, but yeah, of course. I mean, if she does, that would be even bigger. So yeah, this narrative will build. And on the other side, you've got Nigel Farage, Reform, and depending on how well they do, you might have a situation where Keir Starmer's Labour's got a huge majority, but you've got these cracks in that majority. You've got a window into what the election might be like in 5 years' time, and also the issues that might break apart the Labour Parliamentary Party in that first full term. So I think those will be extremely interesting to look for. And yeah, definitely, they'll completely shape the narrative.
Ben, Freddie's brought up the Greens there. Lots of talk about that they've got a really good chance of taking that Bristol North seat. But they stand a really good chance, don't they, in these two rural seats as well that we've talked about on the podcast before, North Herefordshire and Waveney Valley. How's that looking at the moment as we're a week away from polling day?
Just on Bristol for but a moment. Look, it's really possible they could do this. And Thangam Debonair had one of the biggest numerical majorities at the last election. But then you rewind yourself back to 2015 and it was a freeway, or was a sort of freeway between Labour on, 35%, the Greens on, 28, 30%, and the Lib Dems, just losing. So look, in Bristol, this seat went Green by about 59% in the council elections in May, and that was a month and a bit ago. I think they could definitely do this. It's still nip and tuck. Labour is still sending resources there, so they still think it's worth fighting. Britain Predicts right now has the Greens on 40% to Labour 39% in Bristol Central. It's definitely nip and tuck. On the rural seats, Waveney Valley in Suffolk, not far, neighbouring the central Suffolk and Ipswich South seat. You have what is in essence local strength being brought up to general election strength. So Waveney Valley has been solidly Tory. These little towns of literally one's called Harleston, Bungay, Halesworth. They don't mean particularly much to anyone not from there, but these are areas that the Greens have been standing council candidates in for many years. And about 5 years ago, they broke through, got loads of Green councillors elected. And now, after demolishing the Tories locally, are now trying to demolish the Tories nationally for a general election in the seat. And it's a good strategy. The Lib Dems used to do it, but when they became unpopular, they fell by the wayside. The Greens are employing the Lib Dem strategy of getting local councillors elected so they can get the MP elected. And the polling points to it possibly happening. And what's happening in seats like these is when Labour voters in seats like these get used to voting for candidates other than their own in council elections, the idea of voting for that other party in a general election becomes very much normal. So what we're seeing in Waveney Valley, and to a lesser extent in North Herefordshire, is Labour voters, 2019 Labour voters, the ones who came out for Corbyn in 19, saying, well, you know what, about half of us will go Green because we've already got used to voting Green in council elections because Labour don't try here. So we might as well do it in a general election. And you're seeing a big swing there. Currently, Waveney Valley is 29% Green, 28% Conservative, 23% Labour. And by the way, just as an aside here, there's a hell of a lot of seats out there, 80 plus now, in which the winning candidate on the 4th of July may come away with less than 30% of the vote. We are back to 2010 in terms of like three-way splits. And in Waveney Valley, in North Herefordshire, and whole swathes of England that daren't touch Labour until now, we're seeing just that.
Freddie, I mean, the three-way split, but it's not the same three-way split in all those seats, is it? We're in extraordinary times, really.
We are. I mean, it reflects both the fact that the Tories have caved in to reform and also that Labour's struggled to maintain this broad coalition. And as we've spoken about before, Ben, this rise of the number of marginal seats because people are increasingly volatile, their party or loyalties have collapsed, and also the issues that they care about have changed. Brexit, for instance, in 2019 was something that brought together quite a broad group of people just because they wanted to get it done, in the famous phrase. So that meant that you got certain people voting for Boris Johnson who wouldn't necessarily love the guy if Brexit wasn't there as an issue. So I think, again, it's all changed. The Tory party have self-immolated, and the Labour have had to move to the right on issues like Gaza and on the climate, which has helped the Green Party and the Lib Dems, and that there's a huge amount of dissatisfaction, and that's the product of that.
Just to bring people up to date with a few other stories making the news today in the land of politics. 4 men have been arrested from the campaign group Youth Demand for trespassing on Rishi Sunak's property in North Yorkshire and apparently pooing in his lake. But these are truly shit times for Rishi Sunak. A man has also been arrested in connection with the Westminster honey trap scandal, which was when certain MPs and actually journalists as well were contacted by an unknown number. William Ragg, the Conservative MP, had to resign the whip after passing on people's numbers. And tonight we have what we think will be the final head-to-head between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer on BBC One. Do we think the betting scandal will dominate it, Freddie?
Well, less so now than it would have yesterday, just because, as we discussed, Starmer's implicated. But I must say, there have been so many debates, there have been so many interviews, 7-way, head-to-heads, panorama interviews, Newsnight interviews, that I think there's diminishing returns on the debates now. I don't think people are that engaged. When you just have 3 big US presidential debates, they define the campaign week on week. That's not been the case here at all. So let's see. I don't think much will change.